All right. If I have done everything right, we are live. If not, then nobody's seen this. If you are seeing this, if you could, I see there's a few people waiting. So if you're seeing this, if you could drop a message in chat to know that so I know that it's working, that would be really appreciated. I see a hello. Hello, Ryan. So hopefully you can hear me. All right. I see somebody say it's working, so great. So this is my first live stream ever. I've guested on Matthew Jensen's channel, but this is the first one I'm hosting. I fully expect there to be bumps, so bear with me on that. If everybody could just let me know, is the audio okay? Am I too loud? Anything like that? Audio is good. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to be going over the footage I have of me cutting at SoCal Swordfight. Before I do that, I figure I should at least talk about my goals in entering the competition and just my philosophy of what I was trying to do in this competition. So I entered both Arming Sword and Longsword, the beginner tiers, Arming Sword Tier B and Longsword Tier C. My goals for these in Arming Sword, I wanted to just not embarrass myself because I'm not particularly proficient in really any cutting, but especially Arming Sword. Longsword, I wanted to do a little bit better. I entered beginner tier Longsword at SoCal Swordfight last year, and I just missed advancing past the first round by a couple points. My goal was to make it to the second round. Well, I did achieve both of those goals. I didn't embarrass myself in Arming Sword, and I did make it past the first round. And so now I figure I'm going to go over the footage, see what I can learn. Now, it's important to state I'm still very new at learning the correct technique for cutting tatami. I have pretty much no formal instruction. I got a little bit of instruction at Valley of the Sun with Kevin Spencer, and then the Wednesday before SoCal Swordfight, Kevin came over to my house and gave me a few hours of instruction. And let me tell you, those few hours made a huge difference. I now have a better idea of what I'm doing wrong, what I need to fix, and things that I learned from learning on my own that I need to unlearn. So there's going to be a lot of mistakes. If you're an experienced cutter, you're going to see a ton of mistakes in here. I'm not going to be focusing on every single thing. I'm going to be focusing on the techniques that I was trying to work on in this cutting competition. And I suppose I should tell you what those are. And I also need to check chat because I've been talking for several minutes now. All right, nobody said anything. That's fine. So I just have a little wooden dowel here that I can move around without fear of hitting anything. The two main techniques I was working on trying to do is power fingers, squeezing with the pinky and the ring finger to really whip the sword forward at the beginning of the cut. That was number one. The second thing was getting my arms straight during the cut, because that's something that I have struggled with for quite a while. So those were the two big techniques I was trying to do properly. There's also, getting the hips involved, keeping the edge alignment, trying not to twist during the cut. But those were the two major ones. So that's mostly what I'm going to focus on while looking at this cutting footage. And I figure we should probably just go through I have Arming Sword queued up here. We'll just go through it all, watch it live, and then I'll go back to each of the cuts, kind of dissect what I think I did wrong. Feel free to add into chat. But again, that's the kind of thing I'm focusing on. I don't need to be overwhelmed with information. I'm struggling enough with what I have, the techniques I need to learn right now, that I don't need to focus on the minutia. All right, so let me know if the audio of this is too loud also. I'll see what I can do. Whoops. So the feats in open, or in the first round, we're saying 6 descending cuts on paper, and then 6 descending cuts on, or 6 descending cuts on tatami, and then 6 on paper. 3 fingers. And the sword I'm using here is Kevin Spencer's. He allowed me to borrow this sturdy one. They did tell us we had to take a step in front of every single cut, which was something I had to actually practice at all during the Wednesday training session. All right, so that was the first video. Let me go to the second one. And I asked for a straightening of the tatami. We got 1 straightening or respike per round. So that's the tatami. I figure let's look at the tatami, then look at the paper cutting after that. And the sword I was using, I see somebody said they couldn't hear. It's a Sterling Armory. I believe Chris Field said it's a Type 14. To me, it looks a little more like a Type 16, but that doesn't really matter. And it belongs to Kevin Spencer. He allowed me to borrow it because the arming swords that I had, I wasn't quite getting quite the technique I wanted. We found that the heavier weight on that one was really forcing me to get my arm straight. So Kevin generously allowed me to use that sword. All right, and looks like the audio for the video was quite high. I'm not sure what I can do about that. We'll try that next time I play it and see. So let's go back to the first cut and look at this pretty much frame by frame. All right, so trying to, right away I see that I'm moving before I'm squeezing. I can see my fingers squeeze right there, but I'm already starting to move forward a little bit, so I probably should have been squeezing a little bit earlier. And my sword is trailing a little bit. I'm leading with the hand a little too much. At least that's what I'm reading. And that's because I started moving the sword forward before squeezing. That's what I'm reading, at least. And this is something I have been struggling with a lot. And it's just going to take a lot of repetition until I get used to that squeeze and then punch forward. And yeah, I'll probably see if I can just go ahead and mute that footage. Let's see. Like I said, I am very new to live streaming, so I don't see an option to mute it. Wonderful. So the grip, I was actually fingering the blade. I had my finger wrapped around the guard, and I found it gave me a little bit more control of this specific sword. And that's something I really like about Chris Field's swords, is that he keeps a nice and thick, blunt part right at the guard, so you can wrap your finger around it. Let me try this. Okay, I'm going to play the video and let me know if you guys hear anything from it. Did you guys hear the audio of the video there? Sorry if I'm looking back and forth. I'm trying to look at my chat window at the same time. Okay, you did hear the audio. All right, I have one other trick I can do to get this working better. All right, now there should be no audio. That should have been no audio there. Hopefully there was no audio. You still heard it? Or is that before I switched it? Perfect. Okay, so that was my first cut. Like I said, my diagnosis there, and feel free to correct me if you see something that I don't, is that I started pushing the sword forward before really flicking the tip forward, and that led to the sword trailing behind my hand. I'm seeing somebody say I have no audio. Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right. So that was that cut. And I got almost all the way through even still. And that's a testament to the fact that that's a very sharp sword. All right, here is the second cut. And that was a pretty good cut. The result was good. If we look, it dropped pretty close. If I remember right, this actually drops in the green zone, which is where you want it to drop. Yeah, I believe that's a good, not perfect cut, of course, but a pretty good cut. Let's look at the mechanics here. So I don't really see my fingers squeezing there, but that could just be the camera angle. Sword looks like I'm trailing on it again. It looks like the sword's a little bit more out in front than it was on the previous cut, but I am still trailing a little bit. The other thing is I'm a little bit out of measure here. I cut with not quite the tip, but a little further up the blade than I would have liked. And right here, I got some ulnar deviation where my wrist kind of broke a little bit. That's something I need to work on too. And one of the things that will help with that is just really work on keeping a very tight grip and very straight arm. But overall, that was still a pretty decent cut. And this was another fail. Went awfully fast, so need to go back to frame by frame. All right. First thing I see, I kind of cock it backwards. That's not great, because now I'm already making it more difficult to get the tip out there and in front. And yeah, I don't see a lot of squeeze with those fingers there before I start moving forward. And sword is again trailing behind the hand. And again, I am cutting. It's really hard to see because this is only at 60 FPS, but it looks like I'm cutting with the tip again a little bit too much. It's just slightly out of measure. All right, so the interesting thing about going to the other side here, I've done a lot more cutting from my right side than from my left. So this was something I tried to work on with Kevin on the Wednesday before, of how to set up, where to position the sword at the start, and just basic technique. I was actually pretty happy with how I did overall from the left throughout the competition. Not sure about the alignment. So Delatrix is saying that my edge alignment might have been off a little bit on this cut. Let's take a look at that again. Maybe a little bit. Again, it's really hard to see at 60 FPS. You start losing, you don't get a lot of detail there, but it didn't look like it was terrible. It might have been off a little bit. So this next cut, this happened to me multiple times on arming sword. I left the mat hanging by like a couple threads, which is so frustrating. So let's look at what happened there. Not sure how much I'm going to be able to see my hand here. I'm cocking it back a little bit, which is not great. So I do see my fingers squeezing here, so that's good. But I'm not really getting the tip moving forward. So I'm tightening my grip, but I'm not really doing, so I'm basically doing this instead of doing this. Can you see that on screen? There, let me show. So basically what I ended up doing was holding it like this, and then instead of flicking it, I was just basically tightening the grip. I need to move it forward with those bottom fingers. And you can see, because I didn't really flick the sword forward, I am once again trailing, where my hand is in front, the sword is behind, and it's not great structure. So you can, and that's exactly what happens when that, you can see exactly where the sword starts twisting because of the weaker structure. And that's why I didn't get that final thread cut. Looks like I was in good measure this time. I like that spot for cutting. And then I get this respiked, and then that'll be the end of this video. I see monster cans as test targets. So aluminum cans, that kind of thing, they're not particularly difficult to cut, but they will scratch the hell out of your sword. I don't like to cut them because they leave just a ton of marks all over the blade. But they're not particularly difficult to cut if you have water in them or something like that. And you can read them, how the sword passed through, to see if your edge alignment was on and if you maintained a good, strong cut. And Ryan, you said, let's see, I contacted the mat just as my foot was in the air. Okay, yeah, that's not great not great structure there either. So that'll definitely do it. Like I said, we didn't practice stepping at all, and when they, because it wasn't on the tournament rules. They didn't say anything about taking a step for every cut. So I was like, well, then I'm going to do static cuts. And so it kind of threw me for a loop that I had to step for every cut. All right, last, not the last, this is the second to last with the arming sword. So right up, I don't like the position of the sword. I want the crossguard to be a little bit more angled. I'm not sure how to say that, but the crossguard in previous cuts and the way I believe it's supposed to be done, the way I was training to do it, is a bit more pointing towards my face a little bit. So I don't really see that much of a squeeze there. And I am definitely trailing some, but that's not too bad, actually. That's probably why I was able to get through all the way. So I was able to get through all the way. It wasn't the cleanest cut. Even from this angle, I can see some... it's not a perfectly straight line. But overall, not bad. Let me see where my feet were when I did that cut, now that Ryan brought that up. All right, so looks to me like my foot was planted pretty much right as I hit the cut, which better structure. Or it was kind of landing as I was cutting, still better than midair. All right, and the last one. So again, not the best starting position for the sword, but not as bad as the previous one. Go back. Not much of a squeeze there. Trailing a little. Okay, yeah, my edge alignment. This is where the edge alignment failed more than anything else. I'm definitely trailing a little bit here, but you can see the downward angle kind of turns as soon as it hits the tatami. And there's some good flex. Good job, Chris, on the sword. That good flex there. And I just missed. I mean, there is almost nothing. Almost nothing left there. And I'm still, let's see, my foot is still moving a little bit. I could have used to be planted a little bit better there. But overall, I was happy with that performance because while I only got, what was that, 2 cuts through, it was better than I was really expecting. And no, I don't think the spike was spooking me. All right, so now it's paper cutting. So we'll go through and watch this, and then I'll go through each one. And we had to stop between each cut to let the judges see the cut, and then we could pull the paper down. And we did have to do a step in with each cut also. Now the thing about paper cutting is it's a wide piece of paper. Not sure if it's 2 feet wide or 18 inches. I think it's around 2 feet wide. So one of the things it primarily does is test that you're keeping the edge aligned through the entire cut. They're looking for straight cuts, and one of the things that there's a minor deduction for is the paper fluttering, the paper that's left hanging fluttering around is a minor deduction. They want it to be as smooth as possible. And honestly, I mean, you can probably see here, my paper cutting was much better than my tatami cutting. It really drove my score in this round. All right, that was the 6 cuts on paper. So I think there's a little bit less to learn here because the angle is worse, but we can still look. I say the angle is worse since we're looking at my back here for the most part. And for the cuts from the right, we won't be able to see the start of the cuts, but we can at least see the follow through. Although I can see here, I'm driving the sword forward before getting the tip forward. So yeah, the sword is definitely trailing. Not as bad on paper, but you really want the edge, you want the to be as perpendicular to the paper as you can be. Since I'm cutting at an angle here, it makes it a worse cut and flutters the paper more and just makes it doesn't make it as clean of a cut. And you can see right there towards the end, I started tearing the paper just a little bit. You can see right here, there's a little tear. So that's going to be a deduction there also. Assuming the judges saw it. I doubt they missed it. They are eagle-eyed. Pretty straight cut though. It's hard to tell if there's any kind of scoop in there because of the angle and the curl of the paper. So once again, trailing the sword is trailing my hand. But this time I didn't tear. I did have somewhat of a scoop. You can see it starts straight. It actually doesn't really start straight. It's kind of at a bit of a curve the entire way. Still, not bad. Those are minor deductions. Yep, same thing. Okay, so trailing pretty badly here, and you can see was not a clean entry into the paper at all. It still managed to get all the way through without really tearing, mostly because it's a very sharp sword. Kevin put a hell of an edge on it. And there's definitely a curve to the cut down here. It's definitely curving downward some. See my hand tighten up a little bit there before moving too much, and doesn't look too bad in terms of trailing. It is hard to tell from this angle, but it definitely had a bit of a rough go through it, but all told pretty clean. Pretty much no squeeze there ahead of time. Doesn't look like I'm trailing too badly there. So my technique on these cuts surprised me. These were what I considered my weaker side, and yet I got generally speaking, straighter cuts from the left than I did from the right, which was reassuring to me. Yeah, I'm not really squeezing there. But again, there I'm definitely trailing a little bit, but not terribly so. It might be measure was good. All right, that was it. Okay, so that was it for Arming Sword. I did not pass the first round on Arming Sword. They had, I want to say 17 competitors in Arming Sword Tier B, and they took 9 for it, if I remember right. I think my position was 15th, if I remember right. I don't want to bother bringing up HEMA scorecard right now. But if I had done, if those 2 cuts where I had just left a tiny bit of tatami hanging, if those had gone all the way through, I think I may not have made it to round 2 because the competition was quite strong in Arming Sword. But I certainly would have had a much better score. All right, so that was Arming Sword. Let's look at longsword. So this is the exact same pattern as Arming Sword. 6 descending cuts, 3 from each side on tatami and paper, and you must step with every cut. I was working on mostly the same thing. Squeeze the hands to try to drive the tip forward, straighten the arms during the cut. Those are the main things I was working on. Let's just watch the video and then I'll go back through each of the cuts on tatami. And I'll probably have some commentary as I'm watching. Just that. So this is my Sterling Armory 18C that I bought from Chris last year at SoCal Swordfight. And Ryan generously offered to sharpen it for me. It was already sharp enough to cut tatami, but he gave it just that extra bit of refinement that really did aid me here. And I asked for it to be respiked here, or not respiked so much as just straightened out. You could see me trying to check where that landed, but it was too late. It had already moved. All right, so 4 successful cuts. Let's take a look at each one. And again, I'm going to be looking, what I was working on mostly is squeezing to develop some tip velocity and then arms straight. I'm betting that my arms are leading too much during a lot of this because it's something that I've been doing a lot of cutting in the last couple of days of just water bottles. And it's something, when I go back and look at my footage, I see it over and over again. Arms leading, sword trailing. So it's something I need to work on. And it's something I'm practicing, but I have to relearn or unlearn what I've learned for years of doing this on my own and really start driving this into my head. And I'll get there, hopefully. Okay. So I do like that I have a pretty light grip. My middle finger should be gripping the sword a bit more on my offhand here. The middle finger is kind of from what I understand here, these fingers right here, the thumb and these 2 fingers are the stabilization and do some aid with edge alignment. This finger is kind of a bridge between that, and these two fingers are your power stroke to drive the sword forward. This probably should have been gripping the sword a little bit more on my offhand here. Very minor, but something I noticed. All right, so I'm squeezing there, getting the tip forward a little bit, but yep, I am definitely trailing here. And my foot is not, or I'm stepping late, very late here. Sorry, so my foot is definitely still in the air. So what worked here is edge alignment and a very keen edge. That really helped get it through. My arms are mostly straight. If you can see, it's hard to tell if they were fully straight as I entered, but mostly straight there. So this is something I'm also trying to work on. I twist the sword here at the end, which is not good. It's a minor thing, but it's something I need to work on also, stopping it so I'm not twisting at the end. Still, overall, where did that land? Can we see where that landed? Doesn't look. Looks like it might have hit the green. Yeah, so that would have been no deduction for the landing zone, although looking at where the stand is, it really should have been centered better. If it was centered properly, that would have been landed in the yellow. So I got some favors done to me if the judges didn't notice that. So one thing I was very happy with is that all of my cuts from the right side succeeded. I didn't want to mess up the cut that I've done the most of all the types of cutting I've done. You can see here, once again, middle finger is not gripping is not doing any of the stabilization because I don't have it on the sword, on the grip of my left hand. Again, minor things, and I am moving forward some before I'm getting the grip or the tip going. And once again, I'm definitely mid-air on the cut. And I got a twist in here a little bit. You can see the angle changes right there. And that's why this tatami kind of went flying there, because it wasn't a straight cut. And it wasn't quite a 45-degree angle cut. Chris, you asked if lower cuts are more difficult for me. If you mean lower cuts on the tatami, yes, because I'm not as flexible as I used to be, and getting lower and maintaining good mobility is difficult. It's not difficult, but it's harder than it used to be when I was younger. And yes, we discussed you disagreeing with the landing zones. Hey, I'm just going off what the rules say. And I completely didn't even look at that cut as I was talking. Okay. So squeeze there. Again, middle finger is off. Getting the sword forward a little bit better here. Yeah, the sword is definitely closer to leading. It's still not fully leading. And I'm, again, mid-air. And I, again, twisted the sword at the end. But overall, not terrible cuts from my right side at all. I was very happy with that. So when we move to my to my left cuts, this first one is a very good example of what I did wrong on all three of these cuts. Because I've looked at this footage a little bit, not a lot, but I basically I basically just dropped the sword onto the tatami. There was almost no speed here. All right, so, and this is a great example of something I'm not doing right. I'm not even gripping the sword at all with the fingers that are designed to help grip the sword. I'm squeezing with the whole hand, and it really is these fingers that need to help drive it forward. And the sword is definitely trailing there, and it looks like my edge alignment, I twisted the sword right before hitting the tatami, or hitting the tatami and not cutting, twisted the sword. It's hard to say with this, with what we have here. But I'm very happy with where I was cutting on the tatami, or on the sword. I'm happy with my targeting on the tatami. My foot was still midair also. So that's something I'm going to need to pay more attention to, is when I'm stepping, try to land on my foot as I'm delivering the cut. And yes, that Matthew, that is Sterling Armory 18C. And then, yeah, I bought that sword at SoCal Swordfight last year from Chris Fields, and it's just, it wants to cut. That's the best way to put it. You pick it up and you're like, the sword wants to cut. And it's lighter than the Principe, so I find that works for me better. All right, this is something I've noticed just today when I was reviewing footage. If you see here, I'm gripping the sword with my offhand, and then I completely remove the grip. Just let it rest, and then squeeze with the whole hand. Again, not really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to squeeze with these fingers to help drive the sword forward. And I'm definitely trailing here. Edge alignment is a little off, but not terribly. I'm planting the foot right as I'm cutting. That's probably one of the reasons I was able to get the cut here, is that I was planted properly. Looks like a pretty straight cut too. And then this one I remember looking at, I had basically no power into this cut, no speed, no tip speed at all. And again, I'm opening the hand. I'm starting the step before I even start the squeeze. Sword's trailing. Hard to tell about the edge alignment. Again, it could be entering the tatami and failing the cut. That's causing it to twist a little bit. And my foot was, again, midair. All right, so from watching those cuts, what I really need to work on, getting the squeeze started to get the tip moving forward, then move the sword forward with my arms, and also time my step better so that I'm landing on the foot as I'm delivering the cut. Now let's take a look at the paper cutting. You know, it's funny. I was talking to Matthew Cross, who is in the chat, I believe, and he took silver in this competition, and he was so nervous about the paper cutting because he'd never done it before. And I was like, Matthew, you're good. Your technique, you're going to go through the paper like it's not there. And that's exactly what he did. Paper cutting's not particularly difficult. It's more about testing your edge alignment and making sure you can maintain one smooth cut through a longer target. And incidentally, I know at one point, I don't know which cut it is, at one point I do hit the stand with my sword here. I think it was from the left side, but they were not deducting points for hitting the stand. I think it was right there, actually. They didn't deduct points for a lot of things that normally do get point deductions, like hitting the stand, hitting the floor. There was a lot of swords hitting the floor throughout the competition, and there was no point deductions at all. I was surprised at that. All right, so that was the paper cutting. Again, this is a little bit harder to read because of the angle, but let's see what we can see. Okay. Can't see my hands at all. Okay, hands are leading a bit too much. This is a repeated refrain because it's what I struggle with right now. But overall, that was a pretty clean cut on the paper. It looks like a pretty straight cut. To me, it didn't look like the paper fluttered much, but I know I didn't get any full points on paper, so they did deduct me for something. Oh, Philip is here, and there were point deductions for hitting the floor. Okay, thank you for letting me know that, Philip. Let me put it this way then. I think in other competitions that's been a catastrophic failure, and here it wasn't. Man, the point, so many swords hit the floor. Hands trailing again. So here, and you can see, because my technique is not great, the paper's fluttering and tearing here, and I think, is there a tear? No, it's a scallop here. So here, yeah, the swords, yeah. Once again, hands leading, sword not leading. Paper, I don't know if there's actually a tear, but a lot of flutter there and a little bit of a scallop as well. And just, yeah, there is a little tearing. I can see it right in here. And just like with arming sword, I thought my cuts from the left on paper were better with the longsword, which again surprised me. All right, I'm going to be repeating myself here once again. I'm letting go with my left hand instead of squeezing with the power fingers, driving the sword forward without a good squeeze, leading with the hands. But the arc of the cut was actually quite good. That was pretty straight. And like I said, I felt like my technique, my cutting arcs were better from my left. So, okay, yeah, same things. Same exact issues here. Leading with the hands. Pretty straight cut, though. I think I hit the stand on that one. I know I hit it on one of these. I'm betting that I'm going to be leading with the hands here. Yep. All right. So consistently leading with the hands on pretty much every single cut throughout this entire competition, which again is something that I am struggling with. I'm trying to learn how to do better, and I'm practicing with it as much as I can pretty much every day. So hopefully it will improve. So that was the end of round one. And my goal, like I said, was to make it past round 1. And I did. I was placed 13th out of 20, I believe, if I remember right. There was 37 competitors, I think, in Tier C, and I think I placed 13th. It might have been 15th, but I think it was 13th. And then we moved considerably later in the day to round 2, which was the same basic pattern, but on tatami, but it was Unterhaus, not Oberhaus. And at this point, I had no expectations for it because I had barely received any instruction on Unterhaus at all. I grabbed, when I realized I made it into the second round, I grabbed Kevin. We went over to Sterling Armory's booth and borrowed one of Josh Warbear's blunt swords that he had there, just so that I could get a little bit of instruction on what to do. And I understood the technique when Kevin explained it, but understanding it and doing it are two different things entirely, especially for me. I need to let instruction percolate in my head, and days later, it can suddenly pop in my head and I'll have not an epiphany, but it'll suddenly make sense. So getting instruction the same an hour before the cutting, it's not really going to do very much for me. And you'll see that that's the case. Let's see. All right, so this is the round 2 cutting. You can see from the lighting, it's considerably later in the day. So again, 6 Unterhaus, 3 from each side. And this is not going to go well. All right. So now you get 1 restake per round. So I asked for my restake. You can see what I'm doing there. I'm checking where I was hitting the tatami with the sword, making sure I was hitting in close to the sweet spot, not too far out. And once again, we'll go over these in a bit more slow motion, maybe not quite as critical, because again, I didn't have the training that I wanted. And with no more respikes, that was it. I never got a chance to try my Unterhaus from the other side. I was hoping to get 1 through, but I wasn't expecting it. So one thing Kevin told me to do when you're setting up for Unterhaus is start basically from Oberhaus and then drop the hands into the positions. I was trying to do that. It just feels a little unnatural to me. And I was trying to stand up straight. It's kind of a position where you're kind of thrusting your chest forward a little bit, which doesn't, I don't stand like that normally, and I really should stand like that better. So my starting position, I would like the sword to be the tip of the sword to be a little bit lower to aid in edge alignment. So first thing I notice here is I cock back, which rather than driving the sword forward, I'm pulling it back before squeezing. Just, yeah, that's not great. And I'm midair, not trailing too badly here. I am trailing some. I could have probably cut a little closer to the cross guard, just down a little bit right around here, but not a big deal. So yeah, you can see there, I go into Oberhaus and I kind of drop the hands. But again, the tip, honestly, the angle should be a little bit sharper. The tip should be pointed to the ground a little bit more. These are relatively minor. You can correct them mid-swing if you're paying attention. And okay, so again, I'm cocking backwards instead of driving the sword forward. Hands definitely in front of me, the sword there. And edge alignment is considerably off. From this angle, I really shouldn't be able to see the surface of the blade. All right, so I was... Okay, I see what you're saying, Philip, that I was not really cutting past the target. Which, by the way, Philip, I saw... I know that's something that you are a big proponent of cutting past. I saw on some of your cuts where you would sit there, you'd study the tatami, and then you would manually shift your gaze past the tatami and stare into empty space. And I'm guessing that's what you were doing, is you were focusing on cutting past the tatami. All right, let's take a look at this last one. So again, cocking back. All right, so that's something I definitely need to work on. I not cocking back. I need to be pushing the sword forward. Yeah. Hands way out in front, especially as soon as I hit the tatami. Edge alignment off. Yeah, look, I'm exactly the same problems as the previous cuts. So again, I didn't expect to do well on Unterhaus because I just haven't had a chance to really do a lot of them with proper technique or with instruction on how to do it. Now, paper cutting for this round was different. It was not Unterhaus. It was 4 descending cuts from the same side in one fluid motion. No hesitations, no stopping in between to pull the paper down, no stopping to reset the cut. You needed to have the paper down as far as you wanted and then do 4 cuts in a row from the same side. Again, no hesitation, one fluid motion. It doesn't have to be incredibly fast, but it needs to be no stopping in the middle of the cutting. One thing I noticed before we actually watched this, one thing I noticed a lot of competitors doing was they were being greedy with the paper. They were cutting, their first cut was too high, and then they had to keep going higher and higher for each cut. And by the time they got to the last one, they were cutting practically at the roll of paper, which is just not a good angle to cut at. So that was one thing mentally I was trying to think of, don't do that. And I failed to a degree, at least from this side. All right, I'm gonna, instead of watching the other side, let's look at these cuts here. So you can see my first cut was higher than I wanted it to be. Can't really see the hands that much. I actually cocked the sword back a little bit there, not great. Hands forward. I had a bit of a hesitation there, not a huge one, but there was a bit of a hesitation in between cuts, but I don't think it was enough to be a problem. Philip can answer that. But as I started going up higher and higher, the cuts started getting worse and worse. You can see this one, I started scooping quite a bit. In fact, I didn't actually get all the way through. I mounted into the previous cut. And this is what I'm talking about of being too greedy with the paper, is this is starting to get into kind of an awkward angle to cut a descending cut on. And you can see there's some tearing there at the beginning because the angle is a little awkward. And I'm definitely scalloping that also. Again, the angle becomes very awkward. And at this point, I really should have gone for a slightly higher angle here. and I tore the heck out of the paper at the start, and had a heck of a scallop there, but I still did cut all the way through, so could have been worse. I could tell the judges were a little concerned about how to judge this, because 4 continuous cuts on paper that you're trying to see tears and fluttering and the sound the paper makes, there's a lot to pay attention to there. All right. So my biggest criticism of myself here, we'll get to this in a second. Hands leading somewhat, but not terribly actually. But then my follow through, I'm chicken winging it badly here. This was not a smooth motion at all. I don't think there was enough of a hesitation to consider a deduction, but man, that is not fluid at all. But my targeting was better here. I wasn't nearly as greedy with the paper. My first cut didn't really go much lower. I just took off less each time, and that gave me better angles on the cuts. I got 18 points on each of these, Ryan just said. So these were worth 20 points for each cut, so a small deduction on each one. Probably my form being off is what the deduction was for. But overall, they took 20 people forward in round 2 of longsword. I placed 15th out of 20, driven solely by my paper cutting. Obviously, I scored no points on tatami. My paper cutting, I got through all of them. I didn't hit the steel bar. Apparently, Philip said 2 people hit the steel bar. Ooh. and somebody earlier in the competition had a Albion Gallo glass that hit the floor. That hurt to see. Do I have trouble Molineing from that side? I don't know that I ever have done Molinaise from that side, Chris. All right, that is the footage. I have another angle of all the cutting. All this footage we looked at was from Kevin was filming me. I have another angle, but it's farther away, and I wasn't able to really get good feedback compared to this angle. That's all right on the spelling, Chris. I knew what you were talking about. So that's pretty much everything I had planned for this live stream. It's reinforcing what I need to work on, which is really getting the tip velocity, getting the sword out there in front, leading with the sword while keeping my arms straight. Getting the hips involved in there that's something else I need to work on. The stepping helps with that, but really getting the sword leading the cut, getting that tip velocity out there, squeezing before I'm pushing the sword forward. There's a lot of work to do, and I think I know what to do to fix it. It's just a lot of practice. So I'm hoping over the course of the next 4 or 5 months before Combat Con, you'll see some improvement in my cutting in my videos. I did decide to enter the cutting at Combat Con, which is not beginners, and I don't expect to move forward on that because that's essentially moving into open tier, and there's a lot of really good cutters in there and much trickier feats. But I figured, why not? I'm just doing it for fun. All right, let me catch up on chat. All right, thank you, Ryan, for sharpening my sword and for the encouraging comments. Philip, thank you again for the encouraging comments. I really appreciate it. It means a lot coming from you. And Philip, I am going to be doing the cutting workshop on Sunday at Combat Con, so hopefully I'll be able to get some advice from you there. All right, that's everything I have planned. Unless anybody has any random questions you want to ask me, I'm going to call that. I'll give you guys a minute or two if you want. Don't mind answering a question or two if you have something to ask. Matthew, thank you. I'm glad this was informative. There are so many things to keep track of. And what I would say, if you're looking at getting into cutting, if at all possible, get in person instruction. I have not had that at all. So over the past 3 to 4 years, I've been teaching myself. And what that has done has taught me a lot of incorrect technique, a lot of using the arms more than I should be using. And now I'm having to relearn it. And that's going to slow down my progress. So, if at all possible, learn from somebody who can give you advice and instruction in person. All right, guys, looks like that's just about it. So, thank you for joining me on my first live stream ever. I might do some more of these from time to time. I have no idea, but I thought this would be a fun way to diagnose my cuts and get feedback from other people who are excellent cutters on to tell me things that I might have missed, which I certainly did get today. Thank you, everybody. Until next time.